the new world. To think that when I started my career, we used overhead, we'd have these machines with the acetate overheads that we'd use.
But many people got those, you already knew, right?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, we are hearing you.
Thank you. Is that Fabrizio?
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning, Oren, and good morning, everybody.
Morning, Fabrizio, it's Alec.
Green chairs.
Okay, thank you.
Morning.
Technological issues.
Alec, when I finished my master's, my dear wife
Okay.
bought for me a present. What was the present? Electric typewriter.
Ah, yes.
Because I had one before that like this.
Yeah.
That was a big.
So when I was in college, the big deal was to borrow my roommate's electric typewriter for a day.
So back into Podlasia region, it's a historical and geographical region, but also political, ethnic, cultural, religious, linguistic borderland inhabited by Poles, Lithuanian, Belarusians, Ukrainian, Russians, Tatars, Roma, and in the past also Jews and Germans as well. Thus, it's undoubtedly the most diverse region in Poland in terms of nationality, culture, religion, language, and nationality. And this diversity was determined by its political changes as a territory belonging successively to Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Prussia, Russia, the Soviet Union, Germany, and Poland again. And it was also determined, what is quite obviously, by different settlements and different national and religious policies. So for that reason, in the narratives of local and central authorities, and in the narratives of tourist marketing, and according to some scholars, this region is presented as a unique, multicultural example of peaceful relation and ethnic coexistence and place of dialogue. But on the other hand, it's not difficult to observe that this region is it's a territory of very strong ethnic tensions, a space of many conflicts between minorities and majority, based on conflict over memory, difficult heritage, and many others. My presentation is going to present on group living here, group mainly 2,000 people, Polish Tatars. They are Sunni Muslims, and this is minority about other Muslim communities in Poland nowadays. So the Tatars are officially defined as a group of, as an ethnic group. And it's worth to mention that in Poland's legal system, there are some recognized, a list of recognized ethnic groups, and they are divided. So all ethnic groups are divided into ethnic minorities and national minorities. So, and according to the legal system, they are not ethnic minorities. Now let me introduce, but very briefly, historically, this group. So historically, they are descendants of the newcomers from the Golden Horde. The first Tatars arrived into the Grand Duchy of Lithuania in the 13th and 14th century as prisoners of war, followed by a second longer migration, mercenaries invited by Vaituas the Great to help to repel attacks of Teutonic Knights of Lithuanian eastern borderland. And in exchange for military service, the Tatars were given land and status equal to the Polish-Lithuanian nobility, which is still a source of a pride of members of Tatar community in Poland today. A very important event in the life of this group was the reign of John Sobieski, who in 1678 granted the land in Podlasie in return for the military service in Poland. I'm not intend to discuss this history of the community in detail, but in order to understand the Polish Tatars, both historical and today, so it's necessary to refer to the two periods, the period of Second Polish Republic and the post-war period after the Second World War. So after 1918, the new created national borders divided Tatar community for the first time. About 6,000 left in Poland, 2.5 in Soviet Belarusia, and 1,000 in Lithuania. So due to their strong military involvement for Poland's independence, in the new state, they enjoyed special privileges. Therefore, it was a period of religious and ethnic revival. Tatar organization, museums, archives were established at that time, as well as several publications created for Polish Tatar community. In 1936, which was a very important event, Islam was officially recognized by the government. And for this reason, this period of time is often considered to be a golden period of the community. And the World War II and the post-war territory evolution resulted in intense group changes. In 1945, as a result of shifting borders, the Tatar community was again divided. The largest part of the group and traditional settlements was merged with Lithuania and Belarusia. But as a result of the geopolitical changes, some Tatars decided to leave their places of residence and emigrate to Poland. Historians estimated about 2,000 people may have migrated first to the west fields of Poland, then to Podlasie region, and the migration covers 1/3 of the population that lived in Poland before the war. And this event is contributed as the end of cohesive Tatar war. And this map presents the settlements of Tatars and all of the Moscows during the Second Polish Republic, and just 2 of them lived beyond the border after the Second World War.
Sorry, can you repeat what the map shows?
The territory of Poland in the Second Republic from 1918 to 1945, and this presents the main settlements of Poland, and all of the Moscows are here. Live in Lithuania and Belarusia after geopolitical changes. Just 2 of them stayed beyond the Polish border.
This is interwar northeastern Poland, right?
Yes.
Eastern.
Northeast. Yeah.
Northeast?
And Yellowstock is in this region, yes?
Yeah,
Yes.
the Baltic
Yes,
Sea
of
is right
course.
there. You see.
Baltic Sea. yeah.
Due to the political situation in post-war Poland, both the religious and ethnic development of the group was delayed. And at that time, literature described the Tatar community as the regional group assimilated into a Polish society. And after the transformation period in 90s, it resulted in ethnoculture revival of the group lands again. So, but the main term of my speech is to show how the group living today in a specific Polish borderland, on the one hand, emphasizes its ethnic and religious distinctiveness and builds their ethnic boundaries, and on the other hand, what kind of strategies it uses to be considered as insider. It's very important, especially in a situation where the borderland is a place of stereotypical association of both religion and nationality. And it's also very important in a situation when Islamophobic sentiments are on the rise, when at the end where there is a migration crisis, whose victims are mainly Muslims, migrants nowadays. So I will start with the identity of the group, which seems quite interesting. So until the 90s, the Tatar was regarded by researchers as religious and regional group, which is completely assimilated into Polish society, and its only distinguished feature is religion. Hence, the word Polish Muslim rather than Tatars was used in a scholar language. Research from the 90s, after the transformation system, showed that identity of the group is more complex. A model was even proposed according to which Tatar identity consists of 3 non-exclusive elements: Tatarness, referring to ethnicity of group; Muslimness, referring to the sphere of religion; and Polishness, referring to the question of citizenship. So these 3 axes were supposed to be linked together, and according to them, so being a Tatar, it's it's the same as being a Muslim and being a Poland combined together. But the research I conduct showed that this issue is much more complicated. So first of all, there is no single identity model of the group. Its identity constantly changes, and it's situational and contextual. And another important change that I have observed is that the place of religion in the identity of the group also very changed. So Tatar emphasized that being a Tatar today does not mean being a Muslim, just as being a Muslim does not mean being a Tatar, it's obvious. And there is no doubt that it's a kind of consequence of terrorist attack in the USA and in Europe, which intensified the level of Islamophobic sentiment in Poland. So this forces the Tatar to change the religiosity by emphasizing its originality and locality. So so Christian influences in the, for example, construction of mosques is very often emphasized by the group to show the connection with the territory and the local culture of the borderland, where Catholic and Orthodox influences merge. So as you can see on these mosques, both of them are situated, one of them in Kruszyniany and the other one in Bohoniki. They are not look like Middle East mosques. So one of them is very similar to the Catholic Church and the other to the Orthodox. So they very often stressed this similarity. The Tatars often point out that because of their long-standing relation with the Christian neighbors and their isolation from the Middle East, they have created their own religious tradition, which, although based on Islamic doctrines that are 5 pillars, but are original and set them apart from other Muslims all over the world. So they also stressed that unlike other Muslims, they do not pray 5 times a day, and they have the original form of zakat called sadoga. I will show you a very interesting picture which presented sadoga referring to the sharing the sweets during the most important religious event. So neither Hajj nor fasting during Ramadan is strongly observed by most members of the community. But there are just a few examples. I have no time to
Carolina.
more detail. Just 5 minutes. Okay. Another important element part of the group's distinctiveness is its ethnicity. Tatarness is conceptualized around ethnicity of the group that help define the ethnic boundary, and it's evident. This is evident in the relationships Polish Tatar maintain with the other Tatar groups in the other countries. They continue to maintain a relationship with the Tatar from Lithuania, Belarus, Russia by organizing tours to the historical Tatar mosques. You can see on a picture meeting of Tatars, so visiting of Belarusian cemetery by Polish Tatars, for example. Certain practices are also considered markers of Tatar distinctiveness, including folk dances, cousins, symbolic elements like yards, horseback riding, and archery. So these two factors, religion and ethnicity, are the group's differentiation factors around which it builds its boundaries nowadays. But the determining factor of this distinctiveness is the group's emphasis on Polishness. So this is related to the sense of belonging to a Polish state, having a Polish citizenship, historical, emotional, and cultural ties with Poland, which is also a part of Tatar identity. There's something very interesting which comes out among Tatars, which is called Tatar patriotism, which is constructed around some values as loyalty, sacrifice for Poland as their own homeland. It's demonstrating during that celebration by a group of national anniversary, for example. It's a picture which presents a meeting with President Komorowski. I will not talk in detail about it, but I just mentioned that there is also what is very important to know the very positive relationship between a Tatar community and the Catholic Church in Poland today. There's a Muslim Day. The Tatars have this special way to build a dialogue between Islam and other religions in the region, like Day of Pray for Peace, for example. You can see in the picture. But to sum up, all these examples show the need for the group to adapt to the prevailing condition in the face of changing realities, and show that the status of the group in Polish society is constantly being negotiated. And at the further stage of my research, I would like to make a comparison with the situation of Tatars in Poland and Lithuania in order to find any common feature and differences. So for today, it's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolina. So just have to map. Is there any other speaker from the session who is here? Okay. You're Peter?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So we have one online. So we have three, just to budget the time. So we have about 10 minutes at least for questions for Carolina. Maybe you want to stay there because it will be the best thing to just have the question after each. If you want to stay at the front.
Of course, yes, you are.
I'll start perhaps. Thank you very much. It's ethnography and also showing well the changes that being in another country and beyond a border. It's not just a state border, but it's also almost like a civilizational border.
Yes.
Between Poland, who is west-oriented, and the other countries who are eastern-oriented. I wanted to ask about the geography in terms of Tatar patriotism that you mentioned. Is there a homeland? I mean, in my very personal knowledge, most of these people have sort of set around the Volga, from Crimea to the Volga region. Do they refer to some area as a homeland when you talk patriotism? Do they have any geographical rituals or connection to the original region, or is it something that's developing separately?
It's very interesting.
Maybe can I add, because it's related, how is connected to Tatarstan?
Of course, it's a very interesting. It's a very interesting question, and because as I observe today, the religious identity of the group transformed into an ethnic identity more. And after the transformation, Tatar look for somehow kind of expression of their culture, but they haven't any difference. I mean, there was nothing original, so they look for an inspiration, and they invite from Karen choreograph to teach their children, for example, folk dance according to Korean tradition. And as I show you the picture, today these folk Tatar groups use Korean costumes. So it's kind of inversion tradition, based on Karaim tradition. And what is also very interesting that in 2014, Tatar wrote a kind of project to the ministry that they want to learn their language. It was very interesting because they lost their language in 16th century. So they asked the government to give them money for learning Karaim Tatar's language. So they look for their heritage among the other Tatar communities rather than among the Muslim community. So we can see that, so that these Tatar ties can be observed now, and are even stronger and stronger.
And are there some deviations? Are there minorities among the minorities?
After, it's also very interesting that after 2014 annexation Crimea by Russia, thanks to the Polish Tatars, 100 Karaim Tatars come to Poland. So they help them to find houses to work. They help to adaptate for them. So it's also to show the very strict connection, ethnic bonds between those groups.
And Tatarstan?
Just Tatarstan, as I told you. So it's a very important part of consciousness of the group that they belong to the all Tatar world, all over the world, with Tatarstan too. But these relations are based only on official way. For example, when they invite someone from Tatarstan during the festivals or conference, for example. This connection are very stressed.
Well, that was a bit my question too, but I was wondering how much interaction, of course, the last year, things have changed, but were people going back and forth from this region to Tatarstan or to parts of Russia where there are lots of Tatar people?
I didn't know about it. I didn't observe this relation. That many Tatars, there is it's indigenous group mainly. So but there is a problem to find a partner from the group because it's a very small community. So they look for example, partner in Tatarstan or in other countries.
Marriage partner.
Marriage partner, yeah.
And maybe I missed it, but you said they moved from Lithuania and Belarus and to Poland. And are there still some left in Lithuania and Belarus? And you said they visit the cemeteries. And,
yes,
but
maybe I
also
was
have people they relate to, family links and so on.
Yes, but this generation died mostly. I mean, family ties are weekly. So on an official way, they visit each other. Nowadays, coming to Belarus, it's very difficult, even impossible. But in Lithuania, they often organize some kind of trip to visit cemeteries in Moscow. So they try to keep together, but there is always argue between them, and it's also interesting. For example, during a conference, so there is always argue about the ethnonym of the group, which is preferred to Polish Tatar or Lithuanian Tatars and Belarusian Tatars. And they've got always a very big argue between them because the Polish Tatars say that they should be called as a Polish, Lithuanian as Lithuanian, and the Belarusian, of course, as Belarusian. Harry Norris, one of the scholars from England, use a term of Tatars from Baltic Sea. And what is also interesting nowadays is that they try to present connection with the Grand Dutch Lithuanian, and some of the Tatar scholars use the term Tatars of Grand Dutch Lithuanians, for example.
One more question.
Yeah, thank you for this fascinating presentation. And I also wanted to ask about referring to Great Duchy of Lithuania, of course, but you already mentioned it. So I got a different other question. I know that the situation is quite new still, humanitarian crisis on the Polish-Belarusian border. But could you briefly tell us the responses of the Tatars community as a Muslim community to this crisis? I mean, exactly like the, also the symbolic sphere. And, for example, or this response.
Because you are
Thank you.
from the region, from the Podlasie region, so
Yes.
you know
Yeah.
that some of them express their support to the border guide.
Mm.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
Bohaniki, there was put how do
There
you
was
call it?
a banner,
Banner, some kind of banner that we
Yeah, let's go
support.
with Polish services.
Yes,
or-
we support it.
Yeah.
And some of the Tatars are for and some are against, but as I told, it's quite difficult because they don't want to have nothing common with the other Muslims. So they are afraid, in my opinion, they are afraid and they don't want to be. So if they will say that we are for, it means that they are against
Of course.
Polish state.
Yes.
Sorry, can you explain to us, are these Syrian refugees coming to,
It's,
or are there Ukrainian refugees? Who is coming to that border?
I meant, actually, I meant the situation that the Tatar community nowadays
Yeah.
was put by the majority into the situation that they have to take a side, as you said. So they officially they choose to support services and support the state, Polish state, which is of course exclusive. Don't want refugees to come asylum seekers, but on the other hand, they are as well pushed to, for example, like to take care of the bodies of the people who died on the border, on the frontier. So-
Yes, but many of them are against it. But
Yes,
if I
of course,
understand
of
well,
course.
the question was what's
And-
happened on the Polish
Yeah, and there are
Belarusian
many-
borderland. And could you just
And
say
where they came
two sentences about it because you are
Yeah,
you are
we
very
just-
Who are the
involved.
people
Yeah.
that need humanitarian help? Are they Syrians?
And
Or are they Ukrainians? Who are?
No. There is a Polish border on the north with Belarus, and it's something different than the border with Ukraine. And after the war in Ukraine started, so Polish state just let few million people from few million refugees from Ukraine to come. And at the same time, they didn't allow and build the barrier, the wall, the fence on the Polish-Belarusian border because of this so-called hybrid war by Lukashenko, who actually changed the border regimes of Belarus, so let the people from Syria, Afghanistan, so Middle East, but also the Sub-Saharan Africa, and
which are treated what is
of,
very important as illegal migration, not as a refugees by the Polish state.
Yes, actually they said that there was a very important situation that the people on the move decided to go to apply for a visa at the border entrance. It was in Kuźnica, and the Polish state decided to close this while they were like few thousand people were going to apply for a visa. So it was something that had happened early during the Chechenian wars. But what I want to mention as well, that we know few people from Tatar minority who helps, who is providing humanitarian aid. And at the same time, because it is this special tension, because the Tatars as a minority now, they are in a very complicated situation. At once, they have to be loyal to the state. At the second, they don't want to have anything with the humanitarian crisis. And some of them are providing humanitarian aid, and some of them also are pushed, like for example, to because a few people that died on Polish-Belarusian border. Now there are 6 graves in a Muslim cemetery in Bohoniki. So the minority is pushed to pay for those graves, for those funerals as well. While, for example, when the funerals are in other places, the state is paying, for example. So we see another type of the symbolic violence.
Yes, thank you for your explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're a refugee, you don't even have the right to be buried. Right?
Of course.
You lose all your rights, even after your life. Yeah.
Just a very
Any more
short
questions?
comment.
Yeah, last one.
He was
Peter,
first,
yeah.
then you.
If you're looking for points of comparison, you know about this Muslim community in Georgia bordering toward Turkey in the province of Bajara. That is quite significant. Well, I happened to be there in September last year. What's interesting there is there might be some similarities because they are also very much emphasizing that they are Georgians. at the same time as they are Muslims. That is because, they don't fit in this hegemonic national self-image of Georgia as the Christian nation. Therefore, they stress very much that they are Georgians, even though they are Muslims. So maybe
Thank
some
you for your comment. It's interesting. It's, for example, as I told, before even 2 decades ago, some of the Tatars say about themselves Polish Muslims, but today no one uses this term, just Tatars.
May I one last question?
One very last one. Okay.
We only have 15.
Yeah, we have 3 speakers.
Okay, you said they reach out for Tatar communities, but is somebody reaching out to them from the outside as they are a Tatar, Muslim, or however community? Yes, is somebody reaching out to them from the outside?
No,
To-
it's
to
very,
connect or to use them for
it's very inclusive group,
something?
inclusive, closed.
Yeah, no, I mean, if like Muslim interest groups from other countries or Tatar groups from other countries try to approach them to use them for whatever, I don't know.
Yes, we have no more time to talk about it, maybe during a coffee, but
Yeah.
there was, I just mentioned that in 70s, 20th century, Muslims from Middle East come to Russia. And they met each other. And it was the first time Tatars met with the other Muslims. So first of all, they was very happy that it's the time to learn their own, as they say, real religion. But very quickly, there was a conflict between these two groups and they go far away. Because Muslims criticize Tatars, religious practices. They say that it's not real Islam. They criticize many customs and the way of behavior, the women position, for example. But I will tell you later more about it if you are interested in it, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, you cannot help but think about the Jews in pre-Israel times, especially in the Middle East, where they were exactly all the time in that binds of being loyal to Judaism, or Jewish identity, or to the various states. It's always, as you said, it's always this complicated position. And nation states, democracies were supposed to solve that by allowing people citizenship and equality, but we can see that it runs much deeper than that. And those kind of entrepreneurs of identities always generate those boundaries again. What we don't know also are the Tatars that stop being Tatars, right? Because it's a small community of 5 or 6 million, and probably would have been 20 millions if population growth was natural. So that's quite interesting. Another topic that people don't talk about is the Tatars who are, or Jews or the Druze or other minorities that actually stop and cease to be their own old identity, which is very, very much part of the picture. Anyhow, thank you very much, Carolina. So the second speaker is Peter, who is with us, talking about the same region or similar region, Peter Balog from Hungary, about the Ukraine-Hungarian border, which has been in the news recently.
Yes, indeed.
And also with some kind of hybrid border regime. So
You don't want to follow the schedule and go
Yeah.
for
25 minutes, and then we have 10 minutes for questions, then we have time for the third speaker online.
Okay.
Good luck. Those system resources may affect your audio quality. See if they can hear us. Can you hear us? Still online? No, now.
Yeah, no problem.
You can click it off then.
Screen sharing has stopped.
No, you can click it off, okay, because you can see your screen. Yeah, you can
So-
click the presentation at the bottom, like the
Yeah,
upside
yeah.
down glass, yeah, that
Do
one.
people online see my presentation or my slides?
I hope
I
so.
think you took the screen share off, so you probably have to go back into screen share.
You get your time, don't worry.
Yeah. It's, on the cursor is not even,
You could ask Fabrizio if he can see the screen, but I don't think he can.
no.
You have to go back to Zoom and put share screen.
First cancel that.
The green one. Yeah, cancel that. No, you have to.
Green share and the green at the bottom.
It's
Green
green.
right there.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you there, but I think there are 3 of us online who will give presentations.
Okay, so you go.
Okay, I didn't realize. I was asking before, sorry.
We,
So,
we couldn't hear in the beginning, so.
okay, good. Thanks for intervening.
Thank you. I'll be short.
Okay, so Peter, you have 5 minutes less. 5 minutes less.
Compared to.
Compared to Carolina.
Yeah.
And, yeah, you're online.
All right, so I should stop around 10. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here. What you see on this picture is a Soviet era building in the westernmost oblast region of Ukraine, with a Ukrainian flag, of course. And then in front of that is a statue of an 18th century Hungarian independence revolutionary nobleman. Okay, but first of all, I should acknowledge 2 projects here. This research was made possible due to a nice project we had coordinated, in fact, by Sabine von Lewis, who is present here. And this was comparing 4 different borderlands of Ukraine in recent years. And, you know, Ukraine doesn't have 4 borderlands, but we can say that these were to different degrees contested borderlands. And this is by no means to say that we can compare the Russian-Ukrainian borderland with the other ones by all means. But, you know, the project was conceived before the escalation of the war, and we wanted to look at what's going on here. The other project that made it possible for me to present here is a Hungarian project also on borders, in which also my colleague Szilárd Rácz present at the conference, and James Scott are also participating. Okay, so I was responsible for the case study in the Ukrainian-Hungarian borderland, which we conducted just very few months before the escalation of the war. This was in around November 2021, and we basically conducted elite interviews with altogether 23 local and regional elites in, you know, the spheres that we would typically guess would be included, like public administration, politics, and civil society, and so on. We did have a slight overrepresentation of ethnic Hungarians. Unfortunately, we would have liked a more even balance, but not everyone was willing to speak to us, but we still managed to speak to 6 Ukrainian elites and 1 person who identified himself as a Ruthenian. Okay, so there was a very rich material coming out of all of this, but also because my presentation was located in the session on ethnicities, but also because I'm interested in ethnic relations. Today, I'm focusing on the part of the material that can tell us something about why and how ethnic identity can become important in certain situations. To locate this in a broader picture, recent studies in ethnic and racial studies have shown how ethnic minorities are often overestimated by ethnic majorities in very diverse contexts, whether it's North America or different parts of Europe or so on. This can be related to many different reasons, either because certain minorities are talked about much more than others, or because they are more visible in public space, or because they are politicized. We just heard about, you know, the connections sometimes made in Poland between Muslims and, yeah, whether you call it terrorism or illegal migration or whatever. So it happens to be the case that majority populations often overestimate the size of certain ethno-linguistic minorities. Okay, so moving quickly to Transcarpathia, which is the westernmost part of Ukraine. This is a very multicultural region, less so today than until recently, but there is still considerable pride in the region for this multicultural heritage. You can have services, religious services in 4 different languages in one church, and you have Greek Catholics and Lutherans, and the synagogue is probably now out of function, but nevertheless, there is still this pride in the region. This is also visible in the public space of the regional center, Uzhhorod, where you can come across, for instance, Hungarian names in the names of various service providers, even though the city only had maybe 5–6% Hungarians by 2021.
But was it under Hungarian government
It was.
before?
Yeah, it was, but not since 1945. Okay, so Hungarians, Ukraine hasn't had a census since 2001, but some of my colleagues made an estimation in 2017 that the size of the share of ethnic Hungarians in this region of Ukraine is still about 10% in the late 2010s. It's probably lower now, but I can mostly speak about the situation in 2021. The small diasporas have basically been disappearing in the parts further away from Hungary, which means that the ethno-linguistic minority is now heavily concentrated in the borderland to Hungary. So also it was a recurrent theme in the interviews here that the Ukrainian majority tends to overestimate the size of Hungarians. As I said, we're only talking about just about 100,000 people and 10% of the region. Within the whole of Ukraine, the share of Hungarians is 0.0 something percent. So, but nevertheless, they are perceived as a very big minority. And here is a reason why that is the case. We did see a growing presence of Hungary in this region, at least until 2021, certainly. Just to give you one example, in 2017, the Hungarian state allocated about 31% of the funds to the region as compared to the central Ukrainian state budget. So, in addition to that, Hungarian aid, in-state aid, is provided to build and renovate schools and kindergartens, so very much state or municipal functions, basically. They even pay extra salaries to pedagogues working in Hungarian language schools and kindergartens. This also goes for, of course, for non-Hungarians working at these institutions, but of course the majority of people working there happen to be ethnic Hungarians. So there is money provided to rebuild infrastructure, to cultural organizations, churches, and there's even a program for small and medium enterprises, not only targeting ethnic Hungarians, but in the majority of the cases, it ends up being them who get the money from Hungary. Because of this, also among Ukrainians, the Hungarian language is now more popular. As you can see, beyond the typical languages being learned as foreign languages, such as English and German, Hungarian is now also taught at many private language schools and beyond in this westernmost part of Ukraine. In addition to that, since 2010, Hungary is providing its ethnic kin the opportunity to obtain Hungarian citizenship, which is particularly popular in Ukraine, as you can imagine, because it's an EU passport and because Hungary is more affluent than Ukraine. So as a sort of reaction to not particularly this, but Hungarians happen to be impacted too. As you may know, Ukraine has passed a language and education law in 2017, basically to curb the rights of minority languages. Of course, this was particularly targeted against the much more sizable Russian ethno-linguistic community, but it also impacts other minorities in Ukraine, such as Romanians, Slovaks, Hungarians, and so on. So that was seen as.
So what is the language, what is imposed on the minorities?
So
School has to be in Ukraine?
Yeah, what happens is that from grade 5 and up in schools, there has to be more and more classes taught in Ukrainian rather than in the minority language. Beyond schools, in public spaces, any signs would have to be bilingual, and with the first language being Ukrainian. In theaters, performances have to be bilingual on display and so on. And how this is actually carried out in practice is another question, but this is what the law is made to stipulate, to achieve. And it was part of the, the Russian narrative to sort of clamp down on this, what they call Ukrainian fascism. But yeah, this is way off. But yeah, this was one of the reasons why, yeah, some neighboring countries could criticize Ukraine up to this day, actually. But okay. So because of all of this growing Hungarian presence in the region, a separatist discourse emerged in Ukraine, not just in the region, but in the country at large, where ethnic Hungarians were portrayed increasingly as a threat, and it was claimed that they want to secede from the Ukrainian state. There is no evidence for that whatsoever, but this is a narrative that has emerged in Ukraine, in particular a few years ago. Now, obviously, the focus is more on Russia, but of course, Ukrainian elites are also closely watching Hungary. At the peak of this, the headquarters of the largest Hungarian party in the region was bombed twice, and then it was never really sorted out who exactly was behind this. And it was interesting to see in the interviews how different respondents explained this differently. Among Ukrainian respondents, it was Russia that meddled in the region and even was responsible for the bombing of the headquarters of the regional Hungarian party. And our Hungarian respondents didn't exclude this option, but they did also mention that Ukrainians tend to always blame all their problems on Russia. Nevertheless, it's important to say that Ukrainians and Hungarians agreed that within the region, interethnic relations are still quite good. And it's mostly the two capitals, Budapest and Kyiv, that have to sort out their issues, because this is what the title of my presentation alludes to, that, we have learned in this region, in this multicultural region, that if the powers around, if the neighboring countries are having issues, it's us who will have problems. So they need to sort out their issues so that we can live peacefully here. Okay. There is actually growing evidence now that Russia is meddling in the region, and maybe you heard last November, Vladimir Putin claimed that Poland and Romania and Hungary can have or should have territorial claims on Ukraine, which is, entirely crazy. But it's very clear now that, it's Russia, Putin in particular, is trying to drive a wedge between Ukraine and its western neighbors. Of course, no country has any territorial claims on Ukraine among the Western neighbors. Okay, but coming back to ethnicity briefly, the one reason why also Hungarian identity is now more interesting to locals there is because of this change in socioeconomic status. So back in the Soviet period, members of the ethnic Hungarian minority here would, go to Kyiv, Moscow, to the Baltic states to make a career there and to have a better life. And now they are more orienting toward Hungary because of these growing opportunities and the citizenship and so on. As one highly positioned representative of the Hungarians in Ukraine put it, without the Hungarian government, we would be nothing here. Its moral, political, and financial support is helping us a lot. But then we also conducted interviews on the Hungarian side of the border. And, borders create mental borders also, even within one and the same ethnic minority. And it was interesting to see here that one respondent said, this is a Hungarian academic on the Hungarian side, who said, 20, 30 years ago, Ukrainians and Hungarians in Ukraine were equally poor. So ethnic identity didn't matter that much. But now that, Ukraine is much worse off than Hungary, and with Hungary providing all this aid, for instance, the Hungarian University College in Ukraine is in a much better shape than our university here in Hungary because of all the money that they are receiving. So you see that there are different interests here. Okay, so coming briefly to the conclusions, when and why ethnic identities particularly matter in this borderland, but also beyond. First, in the borderland, Ukrainian-Hungarian relations have deteriorated for a number of reasons, but in the borderland, an important reason is related to the changing relative position of the given ethnic group. Hungarians in Ukraine have over the past decade been empowered by the considerable support received from Hungary. in the form of financial aid and also kin state citizenship, which also happens to be EU citizenship, of course. More broadly, then, we can, maybe this case study can contribute to the literature. I won't need as much as that. I'll leave more time to the others. More broadly, this case study and its results, some of its results can perhaps contribute to the literature that says that the socio-economic status of a borderland and, of course, different ethnic groups living on them can affect the importance, how important ethno-national identities are, and as well as loyalties. So just to take very briefly two short examples, also from the post-socialist space, but you can obviously think of many others, where ethnic identity has become a capital for local people in a certain region. So take the example of Bulgaria in the 90s and early 2000s. Bulgaria was going down, and the Turkic minority, and Turkey at the time was, economically developing. So the Turkish ethnic minority in Bulgaria was increasingly looking toward, orienting toward Turkey, also because they were so much discriminated against in Bulgaria in the 1980s and 90s. So then this identity became important for them. Just another example is that of Hungarians in Slovakia, who happen to be much more numerous than in Ukraine. We're talking about 500,000 people there. But their ethnic identity has been, the importance of it has been shifting a lot. I won't even go through all the past century, but just to say that in the 1990s, when Slovakia became independent, and it had big difficulties. It had an authoritarian regime, which was, also discriminating against minorities.
Machida, was it?
Sorry? Correct, Vladimir Machida, that's right. So Slovakia had this brief authoritarian period in the 90s, just after its independence. And at that time also, importantly, Slovakia was less well off than Hungary. So the ethnic Hungarians in southern Slovakia, also very much concentrated there in the borderland, were orienting very much toward Hungary. But in the recent decade, things have changed because Slovakia is now better off than Hungary. As you know, Hungary is not a very sexy country nowadays in many respects, but it also happens to be less off than Slovakia. And the Hungarians in Slovakia, and also in Slovakia, there have been reforms toward decentralization. Local governments, regions, municipalities in particular have been empowered. And so the minority language rights have also improved. And therefore, the Hungarians there are no longer that keen on, not so much pushed on, to maintain relations with Hungary. Of course, Slovakia too is an EU country, so the citizenship is also not much an issue. So the point is to say that being Hungarian in Slovakia isn't as important these days as it is as being Hungarian in Ukraine. Okay, that's about it. I hope I kept the time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to share more, but I did try to keep it short because I know there are many presentations still to come.
Let's give him a hand. Thank you so very much. Another very interesting case, local and I suppose conceptual. What happens for all these empires generations later? Cheskel, who is here, is doing research on this. What happened to this? The people of empires once the empires were seeds, and of course Hungary wasn't a real empire, but anyhow it was part of the Austro-Hungarian, and we still see the ramifications now 100 years later, in a very nuanced way, the way you presented. Question? You have a question?
Yeah. Thanks for the fascinating presentation. You use all the time the term ethno-linguistic minority, and I was wondering, that this is not the proper case to call it a national minority, that it's, with an external homeland, that it's all the time, part of a broader group. It's not just the local context. So that's a question. You were also, I think that it's implicit in what you said, that the ethnicity became a kind of resource for the people, but also a resource for the Ukrainian nationalists, that they built, kind of tool of recruitment and mobilization for them. My specific question was about how they self-perceive themselves, the territory where they live, if they consider it as part of their homeland, or they see themselves as a kind of diaspora that's separated from the homeland. How they perceive the territory that they live, this minority?
Thank you. It's a very good question. I think it's more toward the second among the two options you mentioned. So there is a very strong regional identity in Transcarpathia, in westernmost Ukraine. And just one example and evidence that how that is can be sort of seen. Many times the respondents in Transcarpathia refer to the term inner Ukraine. And this was a totally new concept to me as a geographical label, like inner Ukraine, what is inner Ukraine? And then it was explained to me that inner Ukraine happens to be the rest of Ukraine beyond Transcarpathia, because the region is divided by the Carpathian Mountains. So there is this strong notion that, this is our little region here, and inner Ukraine is a different world in a way, because here we are multicultural and we have our region, and over there it's a different world.
Yeah, okay. So Greater Hungary is still alive. Alec, you had a question?
Well, yeah, just quickly, until your last slide, I was thinking about the Hungarians in Slovakia. So then you got there. But I'm curious, because you talked about how Hungary is actually providing financial assistance to those in Ukraine. Is the same thing happening to the Hungarians in Slovakia?
Yeah.
What does this tell us about Greater Hungary?
Yeah, and Romania as well.
No, it's a very good question. It's true that Hungary, over the past decade, with this government, they've been providing a lot of aid to all ethnic diasporas, even outside the borders of historical Hungary. But proportionally, most of the money has gone to the two most impoverished regions in the neighboring countries. This is one of them is Transcarpathia, the Ukrainian region, and the other one is Vojvodina, the north of Serbia. Proportionally, these are the two regions where it's absolutely.
And not Romania?
No, also to Romania for sure, because it's the largest.
But in Romania, it's more complicated because they're not clustered at the border, but more inland.
That's right.
Pennsylvania, but not so far.
In Slovakia, they are clustered around the border, but they are not as poor. They are not in an as dire situation as the people in Ukraine.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll have to leave it now.
Yeah.
Because we have a few more speakers, which we have to find how many.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Peter, very much.
Oren, for people online, the screen was fixed during the last presentation.
Oh, really? Okay, that's good to know. So we have to do share screen again.
Yeah.
Let's just see. Thank you, Fabrizio. Is Virgi online? Virgi Kaizen?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, so you are next. And is Ramla online?
Yes, I am.
Okay, you will be after her.
Okay, thank you.
And then we still have Karalampos.
Yes, I'm here.
I apologize for before I tried, but obviously you didn't hear me. So we'll have 17 minutes each, okay? Try to accommodate yourself with that, and we'll have a few minutes for questions and answers. We'll start with Virpi Taisio about everyday life and sense of place in the borderland under stress. With the visual ethnography, obviously you very much need to share screen. So I'll go through here and share screen with everybody, make all of you hosts, enable share screen here. Now, all of you are hosts, and we'll start with you. The stage is yours. Try to share screen. Let's see that it's working. Excellent. So I have 6 minutes past 10. So you'll have to 10:23.
Sorry, but okay.
Is it okay now?
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be part of this session. And yeah, well, I will try to make it in 17 minutes. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to be presenting you an ongoing study that I'm doing on the Finnish-Russian borderland. It's not about ethnic relations, but I hope it's still interesting and it's still about the people. And also about the border landscape, but let's get into that right away. So my research is a part of a larger research project called Borders and Borderlands Revisited. And this project is taking place at University of Antwerp in Belgium. The project studies selected border spaces, and it investigates the visual and multimodal manifestations of borders and their impacts on people's lives. So as I said, I focus on the Finnish-Russian borderland, and I study its southern part. So here is a map of the region that I study, and I actually focus on the 4 border cities mentioned on the map: Imatra and Lappeenranta on the Finnish side, and Svetogorsk and Vyborg on the Russian side. And the reason why I focus on this region especially is that, first of all, I've done a lot of research on this part of the borderland for almost 15 years, but it's also the busiest stretch of the borderland, and it has the most inhabitants. So it's very interesting in that terms. Of course, the situation now at the border is very different from what it used to be before the pandemic. So I approach the Finnish-Russian borderland as a borderland under stress. And what I mean by this is actually I'm using the concept of Blake, which he introduced at the turn of the millennium. And what he means with the concept is that many disputes and tensions take place in a significant part of the world's borders. And here we see pretty clearly that also the Finnish-Russian borderland has had its share of crises. And on this slide, you can see some of the most recent ones. And I will briefly go through what is on the slide. So, of course, during the Soviet period, the border was pretty much closed. Not a lot of people were able to cross it. But then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the number of border crossings increased, and in 2013 there were 12.9 million crossings. So this was the busiest time at the border in history. But as we know, in 2014 there was the Crimean crisis, and financial crisis is started in Russia, and this impacted the Finnish-Russian border very heavily. And it decreased the number of border crossings. In 2016, there were 8.8 million crossings. So the number was little by little increasing, but then COVID happened in 2020, and of course the number of border crossings radically decreased. And here you can see the number of border crossings in 2020 and 2021. And by this time, people were already hoping that the border would open again when the pandemic started to ease. But then in 2022 February, Russia attacked Ukraine, and this has had a huge impact on the Finnish-Russian border and the borderland. And now here is the number for the previous year. So you can see that in 2022, there are 1.9 million crossings. So what I have been doing and what I have been interested in is that how these recent events, especially the COVID-19 pandemic and the war in Ukraine, have impacted the Finnish-Russian borderland, the section that I am studying. How they have shaped the material and social landscape in the borderland, and how they have shaped people's everyday lives. So what I have done is I have done ethnographic fieldwork in the 4 border cities in Imatra, Lappeenranta, and less in Svetogorsk and Vyborg because of the political situation and the fact that the border was closed until last summer. My ethnographic fieldwork included visual data production, so I did photography of the border landscape. I also did observations and I wrote field notes. I also carried out in-depth interviews. I will mention, and I will be talking briefly about those in the end of my presentation. And I also collected newspaper articles from local newspapers, and I studied social media comments on these articles. So I have divided my presentation into 2 parts because the thing is that I'm working on the visual material and the newspaper material at the moment, and this is so I haven't really been able to start with the interviews yet, although I mentioned that in my abstract. But anyways, so I will be first talking about the visual part of the research, and then I will be talking about the interviews. So in terms of the visual ethnography, I have been interested in what takes place at the Finnish-Russian border in the summer and autumn of 2022. In what ways is the boundary landscape changing and negotiated by people at the local level in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic and the beginning of the war in Ukraine? In terms of theory, I approached the Finnish-Russian borderland as a borderscape, and I'm sure this is a familiar concept for many of you. I will not be going deep into that because there is no time, but the term borderscape highlights that borders are not static lines, but processual, deterritorialized, and dispersed into society. And they are perspectival constructions, and the meanings given to them change with the fluctuation of historical, social, cultural, and political events. This is how Brambilla how she defines the concept of borderscapes. And borderscapes are therefore constantly evolving. So next I will read you small snippets from the article that I'm working on about the visuals, about what I have seen and experienced at the border. So I will be reading small parts, hopefully very quickly. And so we start here with this photograph. I begin my photography in June 2022 in Imatra, Finland. The roads leading to the border crossing point between Imatra and Svetogorsk that has been closed since January 2021 are calm. It is quiet in places that were busy before the pandemic. Large supermarkets near the checkpoint in Imatra are closed, including Disa's Fish, a large blue hall with a huge parking place. This supermarket specialized in selling fish and fish products that are popular among Russian visitors. After the closing of the checkpoint between Imatra and Svetogorsk, the assortment in the supermarket was adjusted to serve local Finnish customers. Now the sign on the door says temporarily closed. So, although Russian cars and visitors are absent from Imatra's urban landscape, the proximity of the border is communicated by many Russian language signs and texts. The largest Russian language sign is that of Kalatalo. This fish shop and cafeteria in the city center was very busy before the pandemic. According to a Google search, the cafe is open, but the premises are empty, and the windows are decorated with posters of upcoming festivals and motorcycle rides. So I collaborated with my friend in Svetogorsk because I was not able to cross in the summer. And in the end of June, I received a photograph from my friend in Svetogorsk. His friend has captured his daughter cycling near the checkpoint. Before the pandemic, it became popular to cross the Finnish-Russian border both by locals and visitors from further afield. Yet the checkpoints were designed for cars and there were no cycle paths leading to the crossing points. Now the new long-planned cycle path funded by the EU-Russia cross-border cooperation program is ready both in Svetogorsk and Imatra. The irony is that the checkpoint is closed. In Svetogorsk, the new smooth asphalt has attracted children for a fun ride. And now we come to July. Summer progresses to July and Finland removes the COVID-19 restrictions on entry at its external borders. This means that, including others, Russian citizens can enter Finland without vaccination or COVID-19 test certificates. Russian cars and visitors start to appear in the landscape of Finland's border cities. In my social media, local people talk about the return of the long number plates, which is a derogatory term used for Russian visitors. And this is a picture from the Svetogorsk, the Russian side, because Finnish people are also able to cross the border to Russia. My friend in Svetogorsk calls to tell me that he met the first Finnish people who crossed the boundary after the pandemic. They agreed to have their picture taken and were happy about the possibility to cross over to Svetogorsk again. In social media, Finnish people often state that they have decided not to travel to Russia at all to protest the country's actions in Ukraine. Those planning to travel justify their choice with their own tight financial situation and Finland's expensive gas prices. Finland's Minister of Foreign Affairs has recommended avoiding all travel to Russia. So little by little, the cross-border traffic increases, especially from Russia to Finland. And debates about whether it is morally right for Russian people to travel to Finland and for Finnish people to visit Russia begin to heat up in media and social media channels. In the urban landscape of Imatra and Lappeenranta, the first signs of these debates appear in the end of July. First, I hear about posters that have been put up in Imatra in places where Russian visitors typically pass by. The posters read, among other things, "No to the war, stop the war, nothing changes by being silent," and "Russia is not Putin, you are Russia." These texts are written in large letters in Russian language, and there is a Finnish translation in smaller letters underneath. And in social media, there are rumors that the signs have been put up by a Russian migrant living in Finland. The local newspaper reveals later in August that the anti-war poster campaign is carried out by a local Finnish woman who has decided to remain anonymous because of her work and the obligation not to express her opinions publicly. In the article, she explains being dismayed that the opposition to the war is not really visible in Imatra's urban landscape, where Russian visitors have returned after a long break. In late August, a group of private individuals led by a member of the Parliament of Finland, Jukka Kopra from Lappeenranta, start a self-financed campaign in the city. They pay 3,000 euros for an advertising agency to put Slava Ukraini signs in the colors of the Ukrainian flag on advertising poles. According to Kopra, the campaign is not aimed at Russians, but its purpose is to gain visibility for events in Ukraine and to keep Ukraine in people's minds. Yet Kopra has stated earlier in an interview that it is grotesque that citizens of Russia, a country fighting a war, come here to shop and satisfy their needs. So here we are, and October has arrived. My daughter and I climbed Mellonmäki in Imatra. The sun is setting, the air is crisp. From the top of the hill, we see across the border to Svetogorsk. Everything is calm again, yet so much has changed. Finland has tightened its visa regulations, and it is no longer possible for Russians to enter the country with tourist visas. All government parties in Finland have expressed their support for the construction of the border fence. According to Etelä-Saimaa, this is the local newspaper, the border fence becomes a symbol of the end of an era. It closes an era of relations between Finland and Russia, which included cooperation and friendship. So this was these were really like brief snippets from the article that I'm writing. And what we can see here, these are some of the preliminary finding, is that the during summer and autumn 2022, the rapidly changing political situation formed the overall context for borderscaping at the Finnish-Russian boundary. And the political context really shapes the material landscape of Finnish and Russian border cities. First, we could see the traces of the pre-COVID-19 era, and then how the landscape was changing when the border was opened again, and then when the border crossings were restricted again. And in the future, Finland starts to build the fence on its eastern border. So also people and their practices were changing, and this was directly related to the political situation. And the discussions surrounding this cross-border mobility centered around two questions: who is willing to cross the border and who has the right to cross the border? So in this way, the borderscaping, so the negotiation of borders, took place in relation to these questions. Also, the Finnish border cities became places for challenging and negotiating international and national politics and border policies. And then the different meanings that people associate with the Finnish-Russian border and the borderland with Finland and Russia, as well as Finnish people and Russian people, were changing. So, for example, people's image of Finland and Russia were greatly impacted by the political context. And lastly, borderscapes is also about one's own lived experiences. So my experiences, for example, of experiencing and being in the border space changed in this political situation. And my visual observations were also very much an embodied experience. And well, I was not really able to show you this with the small snippets, but this is I'm going deeper into that in the article itself. So I hope that I was able to show that really the complexity of borderscaping in this time of stress. And then just very, very briefly, I don't know if I still have time to go into.
Must finish. Sorry, we must finish.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, then I will leave this slide here. I did 19 interviews with people who have been actively, involved in cross-border cooperation and who've been actively crossing the border for several years. And then I will just briefly say in a couple of sentences that really these events had shaped their lives. And not only in terms of their profession, they had to think of their ways of their livelihood and about their purpose in life, but also in terms of their identity and belonging, so who they are as people. But yeah, sorry, I can't go into that right now.
We must finish now.
Yes.
More time. Yeah, thank you very much. Very detailed and very much, looking at ethnography of a change of epochs, as you said, resurrecting borders, fortifying territory, things that during globalization seems like a relic of the past are returning. But anyhow, it's, I think, more complex than that. It was a very good presentation. Thank you. We'll go to the next speaker, and then at the end, we'll have a question for the last three speakers, because I must give Ramla her time as well. Ramla, are you with us? Ramla? Okay, I see that you
Yes,
are.
yes, I am. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much.
Stage is yours, 17 minutes, and please, we are with you.
Right. Am my slide clear?
Yeah, we can see it very well.
Okay. A very good morning over there, and actually evening in Malaysia right now. Okay, my title is Not Others, the Value of Pasar in the Everyday Life of the Bugis or also called as the Bugis community in the borderland villages of Sebatik Island, Sabah. Okay, the introduction is these ethnographic studies discusses the way in which the border people, which is the Bugis community, undergo their everyday lives on the border. It involves narratives and experiences, especially the cross-border activities, strategies, and negotiation to the state restraints. While the borderlands were understood here as the territorial bisected by the boundary line between states, which is in a comparative perspective is perceived to encapsulate the variety of identities, social networks, formal, informal, legal relationship, which tie together people in areas contiguous to the borderline on both its sides. Yeah. Actually, the studies I did during my master degree, and it is an anthropological study. Follow Wilson and Donan's arguments that the study of the everyday lives of border culture simultaneously studies the daily practices of the state and its intrusion into people's life by focusing on the adaptability and rigidity of border peoples and states in their efforts to control the social, political, economic, cultural fields which transcend their borders. Culture. Adam Smith said the culture in a society is still important in the context of their life, which is the borderland community lives. Even though, like the new book written by Victor Conrad, Border Cultures, I really love that because it is really in line with what I did in my research study about the border culture. So the border of Sebatik, which is, because this is really different from the three or four speakers before, because this is a borders in Asia, not even Asia, but Southeast Asia. The border of Sebatik, okay, if you look at the map, there's an island that divided to two regions, sovereignty between Malaysia and Indonesia called Sebatik Islands. Okay, it's located in border between Malaysia and Malaysia in Tawau, Sabah, and Indonesia in Nunukan Regency, this is an Indonesian side, and whereas this is a Malaysian side. If you look at the map over here, the island, the small island, is located here. This is Indonesia, and up here is a Malaysia territory.
Peripheral.
Sorry. Okay. Next, I go quick. Yeah, the size is small approximately, but to note that Sebatik Island is still one of the remaining three outstanding boundary problems between Malaysia and Indonesia. It's not settled yet. They're still having a meeting to finalize, remeasure the territory, how big Malaysian side or how wide the Indonesian side is still in what we call in process of finalize. Yeah. Okay, and here we go. This is the area that I live 1.5 years, I may say, living with the community. The Haji Kuning is located to Malaysian side. The Aji Kuning, Desa Aji Kuning, is located in Indonesian side. This is the ethnographic map that I drew with together with the community. But this is back in 2007 when I did my master degree. And if you look at here, this is what the imaginations of the community, and I tried my best to visualize it, but together with the community. The community back then, what we called confirm that this is what it is. Okay, right, and the distance, okay, the distance between the two villages is very close, okay, which is only separated by a river of about 10 square meters. Even at the same time, there were houses located above the international borderline, and thus divided its position into two administrative regions. Okay, if we look at here, this is a Malaysian side and this is Indonesian side. It's just separated by the river here. And some of the community just use this bridge to crisscrossing every day, Malaysia to Indonesia. Okay, this is the house that I stay with the community at the Malaysian side. Right, this is the view that I took a photo from the Indonesian side. Yeah. All right, and here, this is an interesting story. This house is become one of the tourist spot because it says that this house have two what you call two states. Okay, the kitchen is located in Malaysian side, while the living room is Indonesian side. So it's become this tourist spot because they say that there is one houses divided to sovereignty, but actually it's not really because there is a lot of story behind it, but I don't have much time to explain it. And this is a new border stones that been built, okay, by both Malaysia and Indonesia. Is it border, yeah? And who is the Buginese? Who is the Buginese? The Buginese community in the borderland and the PSA as social solidarity, which is what we say, the cultural that tied between the Buginese, either they are Malaysian Buginese or Indonesian Buginese. Okay, the Buginese people are known for their migration culture. They are transnational migrant community because the Buginese people is migrated originally from South Sulawesi Island, Indonesia. They come to Borneo Island and come to Sabah. Okay, as most of them is a migrant that become a migrant workers before. Okay, enter during 70s and 80s. The group primarily work and live in Sabah, especially around Tawau. There are a few of them who have obtained Malaysian citizenship status, allow them to stay in the area, which is a Malaysian area. Meanwhile, some of them directly migrated from their homeland in South Sulawesi. Okay, so from that, they are managed to develop the new identity of migrant identity. And since they are living in the borderland area, they have their own border identities over there. Okay, I may skip this. Okay, what is PSA? PSA means paying, or in the sense of its cultural, compassionate, human, caring, and helpful, which is Christian Paulus explains that PSA, or in more complete terms, means PSA Babua, which is in the Buginese language, means the same feeling as the pain of others. This feeling is expressed as empathy for neighbors, relatives, or fellow members of social groups. Okay, this situation symbolizes solidarity, especially for those who were experiencing hardship, misery, grief, suffering, illness, or receiving disaster. Okay, accordingly, PSA is said to be closely related to the identity of a group, as this value binds the members of the group. In the context of Bugis community, especially the seafarers, because the Buginese is very known for their activities as a seafarers, and the region's inhabitants, the value of the PSA underlying the feeling of being a Buginese, fellow of Buginese. Therefore, there is a Bugis word saying that ia simpugiku rikua dinara sirina engkau mesa mesa pesakna, which means even though my fellow Bugis did not bear the honor on me, but at least they must be feeling of PSA to me, which is they have some kinds of belonging, or the emotional sentiment of being a Buginese. We have to really help each other, especially those that really need help. Most of them is the migrants, or if they just arrive at the area, especially when they are being the migrant, yeah. So the identity and livelihood strategies, the Buginese main activities, economic activities in the borderland were traders, farmers, and fishers, while social activities involve sending children to school, getting healthcare, basic facilities. Both economic and social activities are facilitated by the ethnic identity as a Buginese. All right, this is collections of photos. If you look at the bananas here, the bananas is planted in Indonesian side, but they will sell it in Malaysian side. And this, we call that we used to cook, the gas, we call it here, is actually coming from Malaysian side, and they bring to Indonesia. Actually, this kind of activity is not really illegal, but this is what it is in the borderland area. They know they have those kind of strategies how they can bring the what we call the product to Indonesia, and bring out the product from Indonesia to sell it to Malaysian side. Yeah? And this is the area of Malaysian's mainland called Tawau. So the boat, the small boat from the borderland area, from the island, will arrive around 6 o'clock in the morning and look at all the Tawau people in the mainland is waiting for the boat since 5:30 o'clock in the morning. Because you know there is a lot of goods will be sold, especially the vegetables, the fruits coming from the island, and the island is from the Indonesian side. And if you look at here,
One more minute if possible, yeah.
Okay, then I will. Okay. Korean. Okay. Okay. About the this is about the strategy, how they do that. I can like it. They will help their what we call their comrades, the ethnic and the Buginese comrades. For instance, if the Indonesians Buginese doesn't have much money to afford for the land, the Malaysian Buginese will allow the Indonesian Buginese to utilize the land because in the name of we are the same ethnic identity. We are not others. We are the same, which is explain the personal value underlying. Okay, in terms of the land, utilizations and rental. Same goes with the mobility strategies across the borders. Use the identity of Malaysian citizenship. Okay, the Buginese community, since they are coming from Indonesia, and then already managed to get the Malaysian citizenship, but they keep their Indonesian citizens. So they have dual nationality, dual citizenship. Use that as a kind of a strategy for survival, living at the borderland. Yeah. I conclude. Yes, I conclude. Okay. So as the conclusions, this study shows that the national identity of the community merely manifested symbolically towards Malaysian and Indonesian citizenship, whereas Buginese ties of solidarity that is based on the value of person, the spirit of loyal friendship and empathy, transcend the border obstacles of politics and geography. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ramla.
Okay.
Apologize again for the tightness of time. If you can unshare the screen. I want to say two things. One, we're really talking about indigenous people here. In the next plenary session in this room will be about bordering and indigenous people. I think yours was a very good introduction for that. Of course, a totally different logic of territory that uses national identity as another layer in something that is much more profound. Secondly, I want to refer people to James Scott's classical book, The Art of Not Being Governed, where the book is also part of the people of Malaysia and Indonesia that he studied about territories in the world that should escape the purview of the national state. So that was very good connection, Ramla. Thank you very much. We're moving now quite fast to the last speaker, and Karl Lampo Savdarolov. I'm sorry that probably I made a mistake, but you would tell us about refugees and housing, and we're very much looking forward to it. You've got 17 minutes, and then we'll have a few more minutes for questions and answers if people have. Please, the stage is.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning from Greece, from Thessaloniki. Give me a second to share my screen. Savdaroglu, yes.
Okay, we can see it. Very good.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm going to present a part of my research. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the European Union Horizon program, reroute arrival infrastructures as sites of integration for recent newcomers. This will be I will try to be very brief to present a story of a street with wall houses in Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki is the second largest city in Greece, and this story concerns somehow subverts the concept of wall as defense infrastructure to infrastructure of as a housing infrastructure, as an entrance infrastructure for newcomers. The so-called wall houses, or kastroplekta in Greek, are small houses built by Greek refugees who arrived in Thessaloniki from Turkey after the defeat of the Greek army in Asia Minor War in 1922. Many of these buildings are adjacent to or use part of the medieval Byzantine city walls as part of the building. So these wall houses are connected with the identity, the memories, and the physiognomy, if you like, of the this old part of the town of Thessaloniki. However, the city authorities have for long been planning to demolish about 900 buildings along the city walls to create a green zone. So due to the reactions of the residents, the demolition and gentrification plan started to be implemented after 2010. However, many of these houses, many of the old houses have been demolished. However, several remaining buildings are occupied by new refugees from Middle East and Africa who arrived in Thessaloniki since 2015. So the new refugees refused to stay in the isolated state-run refugee camps on the outskirts of the city, and claiming their right to the city, transformed the wall houses, the old kastroplekta buildings, to collective housing commons. So I think that very briefly, it's very useful to keep in mind some theoretical approaches like the right to the city, the famous Lefebvrean work from end of 60s, when he proposed the right to the city as a superior right that not only concerned the citizens, but he also tried to destabilize the concept of citizenship. So he talked about ethnic groups that are marginalized and are living in segregated areas around Paris. For him, these kind of groups are the non-participants, the non-integrated, who survive among the fragments of a possible society excluded from the city. So he proposed as the right to the city, a superior right that it is included, the rights to education, to housing, to health, to work, and all the rights that several social movements claimed in that time. Also, I think it's very interesting the concept of commoning and the rich discussion about commons that especially the last decades especially from autonomous Marxist scholars, they emphasized the verbal form of commons, the so-called commoning. So, for instance, they are saying that there are no commons without the insistent activities of commoning, and line above clarifies and claims that commoning is independent of the state, is independent also of the temporality of the law and the state. So here, of course, it's very close, the autonomous migration approach, which offers, we can say, the lenses to conceptualize the so-called mobile commons of moving population. So many scholars, they have emphasized or criticized and attempt to dethrone the structural approaches that concern refugees as only passive recipients of state policies or humanitarian NGO activities. So in contrast to the victimization and the paternalistic approach of institutional policies, the autonomy of migration proponents highlight refugees' subjectivities and their creative capacity to contest physical and social borders policies and form mobile commons that are based on shared knowledge, affective cooperation, mutual support, and care between migrants. So the area of wall houses was, you can see an empty area in the early 20th century. And in that time, Thessaloniki was the second biggest city, the biggest maybe city in the Balkan Peninsula in the Ottoman Empire. And it was a multi-ethnicity, multi-religion city. The half of the population was Jewish, and a lot of course, Muslims and Christians were the minority. However, after the occupation of the city of the Greek army and the exchange of population between Greece and Turkey, the Muslims moved to Turkey and new Christian refugees arrived from Minor Russia. However, a very important point was a fire that was destroyed, burned actually the 70% of the city center. And you can see here these two maps that mainly the Jewish areas were totally burned down, and only the upper town was remained. So in this area here was the Muslim community, which was relocated to Turkey, and newcomers from Christians from Turkey arrived in Greece, and they they inhabited this area. So this was the only area that remained from the Ottoman city. After that, there was a famous urban plan from a French urban planner, Ernesto Ebrard, but still the upper town remained as it was during the Ottoman period. So the newcomers were much more than the old Muslim community. So they built the empty plots of land around the upper town, and also they built houses also across the walls. Actually, the poorest refugees built makeshift houses across the wall. Here you can see some pictures from 70s, from 30s, 40s, and 50s. Houses next to the wall, somehow they saved one wall. It was the wall, the defense wall of the old city. However, today many of these buildings are demolished, and it is starting the creation of a green zone across the old Byzantine walls. There was a bigger we can see many struggles of local residents against the demolition of the wall houses. Here we can see, for instance, a label that subverts the logo of Thessaloniki, cultural capital of Europe in '97, when there was started the demolition of the wall houses. However, the interesting thing is that today almost more than 1 million newcomers crossed Greece from Turkey to Central and North Europe. Many of them are living or are trapped in Greece, and Thessaloniki, as the second largest city, today has a population of almost 15 to 20,000 newcomers from Middle East and Africa. The Greek state organized a massive project of state-run camps outside of the city. However, many of the newcomers, they denied, they refused to live in state-run camps, and they tried to organize their lives in the city center, and many of them reoccupied the old wall houses, the remained wall houses in the old town of Thessaloniki. Here you can see. However, this area, as you can probably imagine, because it's the oldest part of the city, it's also very touristic. The Airbnbification, if you like, and touristification of the old town is omnipresent, and there is you can say, an ongoing struggle who has the right to the old city. I have to conclude to keep some minutes for a discussion, maybe. So we can say that I would like just to mention the words of a newcomer who is a squatter in one of these houses. Once some workers repairing the walls saw me and asked me, "Who are you? Do you live here in these abandoned buildings?" I told them, "I don't have much money to rent a house elsewhere. That's why I'm living here." They kept pressuring me. They said, "We will call the police." They were trying to scare me. I told them, "Look, I'm from Palestine. I study, I know English, and yes, I live here. This is my neighborhood. Everyone here knows me. I repair the house in the same way you maintain the walls. So I have maintained this house that was built by refugees a century ago, and now it is in danger of collapsing. I have preserved it. I have saved it, so I belong here. I am a refugee too, and I want to stay in this house built by refugees." I continue telling them that this neighborhood is a refugee neighborhood and he has accepted me. Why would you want to call the police? So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, that was another angle. And the way the houses are in the wall houses, you know, it gives another meaning to a wall.
Exactly.
Virpi, the Finnish government is building a wall to deter. And in Saloniki, the wall is actually to accommodate. So we also have to rethink perhaps the meaning of walls or walling, like border and bordering, that they have two faces, Janus faces. It's quite rare that walls become accommodating, but you give us another angle, which is very interesting. And of course, we see that in a cycle of 100 years. I mean, what they used to call population exchange, was basically ethnic cleansing of Greeks and Turks, although it was mutual. That was about 100 years ago, and now we have another wave of refugees reminding us that nothing is ever stable, and we have to reassess and learn the geography of refugees every period, time and again. So let's have 2 or 3 questions to the speakers online. If anybody has a question, we can stay 5 minutes into the break. Yes, if Heskel, please.
Yes, a question to Virpi.
Please speak loudly, because I'm not sure they hear
Can you
you.
hear me?
To whom?
To Virpi, the first speaker. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Is Virpi still with us?
Yes, I can hear you.
You mentioned that the embodied experience for yourself and for residents and the sense of place changed over the last 2 years, and I was wondering if you can share how it changed. I mean, how it's different, that the body experience on the border.
Okay, quick answer.
Yeah, I don't think I can give a quick answer, and but I see it as a connection, that there is a connection between the material space and and what we observe in the material space, also with the political context and the meanings we associate with the space, and what is happening, what is taking place. So everything is connected, and in that sense, that really affects the way that one experiences the border cities and also the sense of place. And in the interviews that I couldn't go into, it actually has to do very much with the fact that this borderland and has given livelihood for these people, and now that it's not, they are not able to get the livelihood and they are not able to have the lifestyle that they had, it is like a really tragic event for them, and that's why their sense of place is changing. So that's a quick answer. I hope it was.
Yeah, no, very good. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, perhaps I'll say a couple of concluding sentences. What I've learned from it, thank you very much for all the speakers, was very rich. And I think all these speakers were really exposing and illuminating angles that challenge the ideal of the territory, nation, law overlapping. And of course, when we look epistemologically, when we look from these kind of challenges, from the periphery, from the what's supposed to be unusual or other into the center, we see a lot of the fault lines of a system that is accepted and is hegemonic about sovereignty and borders and mobility. And I think it's imperative among us to continue and do that, because the system is being challenged further and further. And the walls that are being erected, like in Finland or Hungary or Israel, are just a testimony that the system is under challenge. And those kind of case studies and angles that you brought, some of it even very poetic, like the Bugis or the Finnish people, and some of it more political, like the Greater Hungary or the Belarus, Polish sovereignties, are all, I think, very good in illuminating the changes in the system that we have to accommodate, understand, and maybe push forward in terms of the pursuit for a better world. So I wouldn't quite say borderless world, because borders are with human society forever, but let's say kinder and more democratic borders. So thank you very, very much. We had a good, loyal audience here, very good speakers, and we hope to see you at 11:30 with the plenary about indigenous people.
May I say 2 words, Oren?
Okay, very quickly.
No. I want to thank all of you, and especially for the photos by Ramla Binti. And I'm going to use the photo of the small river separating 2 states in my presentation, because it is one of the best example of how the borders, separating borders, are a mental construction above the low level of the ordinary life of the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabricio. Absolutely. Good conclusion. Yeah, it's all in our mind.